What is the hidden secret of Dhul-Qarnain in the Qur'an? Is he the same Cyrus the Great? Is he still alive? Stay with us until the end of this video to get answers to all your questions. Answers that will definitely delight you. One of the most strange surahs full of questions in the Qur'an is Surah Kahf. Surah Al-Kahf talks about different people, including about the 7 sleepers, Dhul-Qarnain, etc. Especially in the case of Dhul-Qarnain, about which various discussions, interpretations, and analyses have been said. In this video, we examine Dhul-Qarnain in the Qur'an from different aspects. The characteristics of Dhul-Qarnain according to the description of the Qur'an. In order to examine the character of the men of history corresponding to Dhul-Qarnain, the individual characteristics of Dhul-Qarnain must first be clarified. The best source that mentioned the characteristics of Dhul-Qarnain is the Holy Qur'an. Dhul-Qarnain described in the Qur'an has the following characteristics. He was the one whose name was famous among a group of people before the Qur'an was revealed, and the Quraysh, or the Jews, asked Prophet Muhammad about him. It had a crown or a hat with 2 horns on top of it. God has given him the means of victory. He had 3 important campaigns, first to the west, then to the east, and finally to a mountain pass. He has met relatives in each of these trips. He was a united, faithful, and kind man, and did not deviate from the path of justice and giving. And because of this, he was subject to God's special grace. He was a friend of the righteous and an enemy of the wicked, and was not interested in worldly wealth. He believed in both God and the day of resurrection. He was the builder of one of the most important dams, a dam in which iron and copper were used instead of brick and stone, and the purpose of its construction was to help an oppressed group against the oppression of Gog and Magog people. Gog and Magog are the names of the people or tribes that have been introduced as a cruel group due to the harassment and looting of other people's property. According to the verses of the Qur'an, Dhul-Qarnain ordered the residents of the areas that were persecuted by Gog and Magog to build a dam to counter their influence. He does. Historical figures attributed to Dhul-Qarnain. According to the characteristics mentioned in the Holy Qur'an, there are theories about Dhul-Qarnain, and many people have been attributed to him in history. Some of the most important ones are mentioned here. Alexander the Macedonian. According to some documents, Zulqarnain was attributed to Iskandar because he used to wear a hat that had 2 ridges in the middle and placed an ostrich or other bird feather on each one. But this theory is rejected because Alexander was a polytheist and an idolater, and even after his victory over the Achaemenids, he claimed to be a god. Therefore, it contradicts what is described in the Qur'an, the Great Cyrus. This is a new theory proposed by the famous Islamic scholar Abul Kalam Azad, and some commentators have accepted it. Cyrus was the king of Iran during the Achaemenid period, who lived from 539 to 560 BC. The Alame Tabatabai also, in his book Al-Mizan, accepts the opinion of Abul Kalam Azad and considers the characteristics of Cyrus to be compatible with Dhul-Qarnain. Alame Tabatabai in Al-Mizan, after examining the theory of Abul Kalam Azad, which proves that Cyrus, the Achaemenid king, is the same as Dhul-Qarnain praised in the Qur'an, writes, "Although some of the things that have been said are not without objection, but from any other speech, its conformity with Quranic verses are clearer and more acceptable. The reasons for the adaptation of Dhul-Qarnain to Cyrus the Great. He was a God-knowing, monotheistic and believing man. The kingdom was just and kind to the subjects. He has been strict with the wrongdoers. Religion, intellect, moral virtues, and wealth were gathered in him. Cyrus marched to the west and conquered Lydia and its surroundings. He also moved towards the east and reached Matla al-Shams, where he met a desert-dwelling and wild man. He built a dam made of iron, which is in the Darial Strait, and between the Caucasus Mountains and near the city of Tbilisi. The reasons for the adaptation key verses of the Qur'an about Dhul-Qarnain. The Holy Qur'an mentions Dhul-Qarnain 3 times and tells his story in verses 80-96 of Surah Kahf. The mystery of Dhul-Qarnain begins when some Arabs went to the Jewish elders and said, "Someone has come and claimed to be a prophet. We want to test him." They said, "Ask him about Dhul-Qarnain." In response to them, God said about Dhul-Qarnain, God gave him power and rule on earth and provided all means of rule for him. On a journey to the west, he reached a place where he felt the sun setting in a spring or a dark and muddy sea, and there he found a group of good and bad people. God said to him, "Do you want to punish them or choose a good way among them?" He said, "We will punish those who have done wrong, but we will reward those who believe and do righteous deeds." He ended his journey to the west and then decided to go east and continued on his way, using the tools and equipment at his disposal until he reached the origin of the sun, and there he saw the sun rising to a population for whom there is no cover except the sun. Their life is very basic. He continued his journey until he reached between two mountains and encountered a group that did not understand anything. They, who were in torment due to the bloodthirsty and stubborn enemies named Yagog and Magog, honored his predecessor and complained that Yagog and Magog were corrupting in this land, and asked him to build a dam to confront them. Zulqarnain told them that, "I don't need your financial help, but help me to achieve this goal," and then he ordered large pieces of iron to be brought to him, and he placed them in a suitable manner, and then he ordered molten copper to be brought to him to pour over the dam. Considering that the Qur'an is like a very wide table that has many hidden layers that have not yet been understood and discovered, commentators have different views of the Qur'an. Recently, an interesting view has emerged about Dhul-Qarnain, and a new issue has been raised regarding verses 82 to 96 of Surah Al-Kahf, which shows that these verses are very complicated and full of questions. To see the shocking result of this new analysis, stay with us until the end of the video. New viewpoints from verses 82 to 96 of Surah Kahf. According to the future verb, "we will speak," in verse 83 of Surah Kahf, if this phrase meant the story of Dhul-Qarnain, it should have been mentioned in the next few surahs, while it is immediately mentioned in verses 83 and following of the same surah that with the future tense of this phrase is not appropriate. So it should be said that the meaning of this phrase is the coming of Zulqarnain himself in the future, not his story. According to the meaning of the word qarn, which means horn and branch, this horn cannot be applied to the head of a human or animal. And yet, considering the clarity of the Qur'an in verses 83 to 98 of Surah Kahf, and the narrations of the Imams regarding the conquest of the east and west of the world by Dhul-Qarnain, the meaning of 2 centuries. The 2 directions are east and west of the globe, not the horn of the head. Based on this meaning, Zulqarnain cannot be applied to Cyrus or Alexander the Macedonian, because they conquered from the west to Greece and from the east to China, which is related to the story of Zulqarnain, that until the sun set on the earth and until the sunrise, and after that, he did not build until he had conquered the American continent. And basically, in the past history, no one's territory was so large. On the other hand, according to the idiomatic meaning of the word Qaran in Dhul-Qarnain, which means generation, the meaning of Dhul-Qarnain is that he was the owner of 2 different and separate generations, while Cyrus lived in 1 century and for 75 years. Iskandar also died about 40 years after that, and did not come back to life again, while Zulqarnain is said to be someone who lived in 2 different centuries, in the sense that he was born in 1 century, and after that, in the work of death or absence, separates from that generation, and then resurrects or appears in the next generation. According to verses 85 and 86 of this surah, God gives power to Dhul-Qarnain that even some prophets do not have. The Qur'an says, "We had given him the power on earth." That is, he had given him the cause of everything, anything that crosses your mind. There is no exception. The cause of everything is Dhul-Qarnain, but this power was not in the existence of Cyrus or Alexander. According to the 95th verse of Surah Al-Kahf, the people on the other side of the earth are proposing to Dhul-Qarnain, "Do you want to give us money and financial aid to build a barrier against us and the people of Gog and Magog so that they cannot harm us?" In response to them, he says, "What God has given me is better than your help. Just help me with manpower." We come to the conclusion that Cyrus and Alexander of Macedonia, whose rule was based on taking taxes from the people under Ubuda's rule, cannot be an example of Dhul-Qarnain. According to verse 88 of Surah Al-Kahf, which clearly states the salvation of those who have faith and righteous deeds, it shows that Dhul-Qarnain is a righteous servant of God who received the mission from God and appears to save the righteous and weak servants, and verse 5, Surah Kahf, proves this claim. Therefore, the meaning of Dhul-Qarnain cannot be Cyrus or Alexander or anyone else whose work was to oppress and kill innocent people, and who had no inspired connection with God. According to the phrase, we will say, in verses 87 and 88 of Surah Kahf and the word Yisra, which means opening and comfort, we come to the conclusion that in the future, with his coming, the believers and the righteous will be in comfort, and the oppressors will be oppressed. They have severely punished and disobeyed, and will suffer the severe punishment of God in the hereafter. But who is Zulqarnain? A person who owns 2 nations has a lot of power that the prophets do not have. Only people whose ears are full of everything, Marxism, fascism, communism, liberalism, etc., understand what he is saying. They are only waiting for a word, and that is only a divine promise. They know Dhul-Qarnain when he comes. They say, "Only you can start our business." When money comes first, everything is monetary and financial. But his government is not based on money, economy, and rent-seeking. He wants the people themselves. It requires their strength and effort. As long as they don't want him and don't dare, the dam will not be built, and they will not be freed from the oppression of the oppressors. But then he builds a barrier that no more corruption will happen on earth until the day of judgment. Dear friends, what do you think? Please comment for me.